This is Apropos. Well, the Prime Minister of Greece is urging EU prosecutors to swiftly decide whether or not to indict lawmakers from his centre-right New Democracy Party as he seeks to address a mounting political crisis over a farm fraud scandal that's forced several of his cabinet ministers to resign. The case has seen dozens of stockbreeders charged with the fake ownership of pastureland to claim millions of euros in EU subsidies, allegedly with assistance from state employees and Conservative politicians. Liz Kamenov has more.
Greece's government is under fire as the EU farm subsidy scandal widens. Prosecutors are targeting at least 11 Conservative lawmakers, some former ministers, allegedly involved in the scheme, and are demanding an end to their legal immunity. Evidence submitted to Parliament showed conversations between MPs and the government's agricultural agency responsible for distributing EU subsidies to farmers. In a television address, the Prime Minister acknowledged the development in the investigation, but stood by his lawmakers' right to due process, arguing the charges varied in gravity.
I ask that after lifting the immunity of our members of Parliament, the European Public Prosecutor's Office proceeds rapidly with all investigative actions, because we're talking about our MPs who've already suffered a personal and political blow. They have the minimum right to defend themselves.
Only Parliament can lift the immunity protecting these officials from facing charges, which include breach of trust and computer fraud. The scandal has already led to a minister's resignation and the closure of the government's agricultural agency. Prime Minister Mitsotakis' centre-right party has 156 lawmakers in the 300-seat parliament. Last week, he reshuffled his cabinet for the second time since the scandal surfaced and pledged reforms to increase transparency. The fraud scheme had exploited loopholes in the 2014 change to EU subsidy rules, basing them on land area rather than livestock. With unclear ownership across much of Greece, farmers falsely declared land ownership from banana plantations, pastures to olive groves to claim some 23 million euros. After a discussion on the issue on Tuesday, the Greek Parliament is expected to vote next week on whether or not to lift the MP's immunity.
Well, for more, we're joined now by Georgios Samaras, Assistant Professor in Public Policy at the School for Government and Policy Institute at King's College London. Thanks so much, Georgios, for being with us on the programme. Explain for us, if you can, what exactly is at the heart of this farm subsidy scandal and how serious is it for the Greek government?
Yeah, it's been an ongoing situation involving the agricultural industry for approximately 30 years. We have seen the scandal emerging and re-emerging, and of course, PKP, which is the name of the organization involved in this, has been caught red-handed here with a lot of European funds ending up in pockets where it shouldn't have ended up in. There is no doubt that the Prime Minister will be protected by his own MPs and ministers. He has been doing this for years. He claims that he did not know, that he was misled, that someone else is responsible, and that these are basically the excuses that are wearing thin and have been wearing thin for a while. We need to remember that, of course, this is not the first scandal that emerges under this government, and the only way to describe Kyriakos Mitsotakis and his government is that they're a regime of permanent managed scandal since they came to power in 2019.
And how has the Greek public been responding to all of this? We saw several cabinet ministers being forced to resign just last week. Has that done anything to quell public anger, or are people there feeling, really just resigned about what they're seeing happening? You say this has been ongoing for more than 3 decades now in some form or another.
Yeah, on the one hand, the public is aware of these farming scandals that have been emerging and re-emerging over the past 30 years. It's not something new, but the scale of this scandal is much bigger, and I'm pretty sure that once the agricultural industry is impacted, things might get difficult for the Prime Minister. I don't think that the resignations or any of these excuses are going to do anything. Kyriakos Mitsotakis is trying to gaslight the again, the electorate. He is aware of the consequences of this because it contradicts his own claims that he would tackle corruption, but systemic corruption is at the very heart of the government. And instead, he's now once again asking for resignations without any kind of reassurances that this will be sorted out. Mitsotakis also claimed that he would fight the deep state. But that line is so contradictory and weird because after 7 years in office, he's the deep state. He does not stand apart from it. He embodies it.
Yeah, and he's also previously used his parliamentary majority to block a full-scale investigation in order to presumably protect some of his ministers who are accused of wrongdoing. So what has he actually done more generally to try to stamp out entrenched corruption in Greece?
Mitsotakis has done nothing to tackle corruption, and we need to realize that back in 2010, when the IMF, the ECB, and the European Union placed Greece under enhanced surveillance, they moved quickly to identify systemic corruption in the context of the country, where they argued that financial scandal that led to the bankruptcy of the nation was impacted by elite immunity, and that's how you diagnose systemic corruption. In 2019, the New Democracy Party won the election. Since then, there was the Novartis bribery scandal involving state officials, no convictions. The illegal pushbacks that left refugees dead at the borders, no convictions. The wiretapping scandal, where the Prime Minister's office was caught spying on opponents, citizens, ministers, no convictions. The Tempe train crash that killed 57 people, no convictions. Now the farming scandal. There is also the RRF scandal coming up. Millions of euros disappearing, no convictions.
And why does this concept of legal immunity still exist? And do you think that lawmakers are actually going to vote next week to lift that?
I think that the situation is much trickier this time around because we're not waiting for Greek prosecutors to take over this case. These cases are now allocated to European prosecutors who are aware of one thing, that Greek justice cannot be trusted. And this is a phenomenon that has been impacting all of these cases of corruption, but they're aware that the Greek authorities are not willing to police themselves. They're aware that all of these excuses under this government are not just wearing thin, but that even next week, many of these cases will be disputed because the government has already been claiming that all of this is politically motivated, that it's the Russians, or that the European prosecutor is actually acting in an irresponsible way. So it's not just the resistance to police themselves, but it's also a continuous effort now to interfere with the work of justice and legal authorities that are responsible for going after politicians who have defrauded the system, and now they have basically to answer for the crimes, because there is a lot of financial crime right now within this government, and there is no doubt that some of the MPs and ministers have personally benefited from the farming funds from the European Union.
Yeah, because a lot of analysts say that this kind of corruption, it extends beyond individual scandals. And I think you might agree, Georgios, and it goes as far as into the very structure of the whole economic and the political systems in Greece. Why, can you explain to us, does corruption remain such a huge issue in Greece? Surveys suggesting that up to 97% of Greek people themselves believe that it's still widespread and endemic.
I think that there is an uneven fight going on against corruption. On the one hand, when there is a political power that returns to the government in 2019 with that specific narrative, arguing that they're going to break with the past, but instead the scandals return, they repeat, they multiply. Then people lose faith that the government can tackle corruption. Instead, the government goes after what I would describe as micro-corruption, which exists in lower levels, of course, of the economy. It's easy to go after that kind of corruption because it's easy to identify it. It's small, though. It's not going to contribute meaningfully to the economy. However, when this uneven corruption dominates in society, then the government demonstrates that they are completely unable at going after themselves and police themselves. That's why the trust is so low in the government in fighting and also exposing corruption. They're part of the corrupt system and they sustain it.
So in that case, is it up to the EU then to try to force change here? It has been taking a more assertive role when it comes to these kinds of scandals in the last few years.
Yeah, I would like to point out that I don't know how familiar you are, and all of the Europeans who are currently listening, or Americans or anyone else around the world, but the Greek government has already started a campaign against the European prosecutor. And there have been certain figures like Adonis Georgiadis, who is actually the vice president of the New Democracy Party. They have been giving interviews daily after the allegations and, of course, the discussions began about the people involved from the party in the subsidy scandal. So they're trying to discredit the European prosecutor. And while they're trying to do that and blame the Russians or any foreign forces that are interfering with in Greek politics, I think that what you just pointed out about the Europeans is actually true. There are still some independent bodies within the European Union who can do their job perfectly well. And when a whole state governed by a government that is so incompetent at dealing with corruption and also unable to police itself, then someone else has to do it for them. I'm not, of course, arguing that this is going to take away the authority and the powers that the Greek state possesses as a sovereign state. But we are witnessing once again the same political powers returning after 10 years since the country went bankrupt, promising to fix everything, and now we're in the same place where it all started. I don't even know what to say about it.
Georgios, we'll have to leave it there, unfortunately. Thanks so much for being with us, though, on the programme. That's Georgios Samaras, Assistant Professor in Public Policy at King's College London.